Welcome, Julian.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. I'm happy to see you again. It's been a while since we've had a chat, so welcome back. I am so happy to have you here on Meet Me in the Mushroom, and I just wanted to just briefly introduce you for our viewers, who I'm sure there'll be many people aware of you, but for those who are new to your work, Julian is an occultist from Britain. He's living currently in Devon. He is a key person involved with Breaking Convention, one of my favorite psychedelic conferences worldwide. Hopefully it's going to be returning soon after a sabbatical. And Julian is also an author and a psychonaut, psychedelic explorer. So welcome, Julian.
Kathy, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
So how are things in Devon? Is it nice and quiet there at the moment?
Well, particularly today and the last few days, it's been glorious. We're riding the very beginning of spring. And whilst there is at a local and global level many perturbances, we might call them, in this process, nevertheless, the spring is coming. The flowers are emerging. The birds are doing their thing. You know, the underlying trajectory is that kind of outward moving deliciousness of the first part of the spring. So that's all very good. That's all very good.
Beautiful. What a perfect time of the year. And so I've been reading your book, Getting Higher, a manual of psychedelic ceremony, and really wanted to get into some of the concepts that you touch on in that book in our conversation today, because for me, it is just such a perfect revelatory exploration for so many types of psychedelic explorers, from people who are very new to this type of experience to people who are maybe have more advanced spiritual practices or magical practices or whatnot. And I just loved how you merged a very practical approach to the set and setting and to understanding the nature of the medicine you're working with, and then tied in various traditions and esoteric understandings or spiritual practices. And I think that's one of the reasons why I resonate with your work in particular. I remember once hearing you say in an interview how you're like a magpie, and you have this very fine art of being able to weave together various concepts and create something that just creates a lot of curiosity. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the inspiration for that book in particular.
I'm glad you liked it, and hopefully it was kind of, you know, helpful, and it seems to have been enjoyed, which is great. So some of my professional work is I work in museums and galleries. And those are special places that we have on the planet where we put, you know, artworks and interesting things from the past and so on. And we curate them in various kind of spaces. And my work in that kind of field is all about accessibility. It's like, okay, so this is great, isn't it? We've got this museum with some stuff in it, or we've got this gallery with some paintings in it. How do we kind of engage with that? How do we get something out of that? How do we experience that in some kind of a way that is deeper than just sort of floating around being a bored student who's been brought out to this thing that's, you know, a bunch of irrelevant pictures of dudes with beards or things in glass cases that mean nothing? And the way that we do that is we do it through technique very often. So I'll give you an example. So sometimes when I work with kind of maybe students around the age of, you know, 11, 12, something like this, and I bring them into a gallery space and I say, okay, folks, we're going to go to a gallery, right? I want you to go in as a ninja thief. I want you to go into this gallery, stay low, avoid the security if you can, be quiet. I want you to go round and case the joint, decide on which object you want to steal from this gallery, come back and tell me what it is and why. So what we've done is we've changed people's orientation to the experience of going through this gallery. We've, instead of just saying, hey kids, there's a bunch of old stuff, go and have a look, tell me what you think, whatever. We've given them a mission, we've given them an approach And what I've tried to do in Getting Higher is to give people an approach to psychedelics, which I hope blends both in the Wiccan tradition, which I'm part of. We have a thing called The Charge, this beautiful poem about the goddess, and it talks about mirth and reverence as these two kind of complementary poles of the experience of the sacred. And I hope in Getting Higher I've managed to capture that. We can have mirth, we can have joy, we can have fun, it can be like entertaining, hey kids, we're ninjas. And it can be reverent, like, hey, we're going to really pay attention to this stuff, we're going to really engage with what's here, we're going to really understand it, we're going to really appreciate it. So my work is work in which I aspire, as far as I can, to make things approachable for people, because it's quite tempting and it's understandable for us to think, oh, you know, the answer is over here, the answer is over there, the answer is in this particular cultural setting or in this particular text or whatever. And most of the time, the answer is within us as individuals and communities. And it's just about having a technique that brings us into relationship, in this instance with the psychedelic medicine, in a particular kind of a way. So although in Getting Higher I've kind of drawn on the traditions and the fabulous people who've been my teachers and friends, who've shown me things from different kind of cultural settings and different ways of being with medicine, fundamentally it's about finding our own way in this.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. And this has been, it inspires some reflection for me around a deep dialogue that I'm consistently having with people I'm interfacing with around how do we find unique ways of interfacing with our landscape and our, whether it's a native psychedelic like psilocybin or liberty caps, for example, if you're in the UK or Ireland, and finding our way back to these spaces with a lot of curiosity. And I think that's what interests me about how we can have conversation even about Wicca and psychedelics, because that's not really, it's not been a long-standing conversation. I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, guys, you brought up a lot of different things there. I mean, the relationship with landscape, the relationship with place, and our kind of location in the places in which we live and we find ourselves, and finding the spirit of those places and blending that with our practice in some way. So, for example, in Wicca, one of the kind of the key motifs that appears is this idea of, broadly speaking, 8 seasonal celebrations, roughly 6 weeks apart, the Sabbats. And so for me, part of my practice is very much engaged with that kind of wheel of the year. So I live in the British Isles, which is pretty far north. It's got quite, on the one hand, extreme changes in light, but also a temperate maritime climate. So for me, engaging with the passage of the seasons, with the what's going on, really informs my work with psychedelics and with ritual more broadly. Ritual is a way of creating a series of inhabited metaphors. Like that's kind of what it is, really. And we do this naturally and normally as humans. We don't have to be special people from a special place or a special lineage to do it. We do it all the time. The way we greet each other, the way we leave, plant sex organs, flowers at the grave of those who we care about. We do all these ritual things all the time. And part of what ritual is this opportunity to create kind of containers that connect us deeply with the things that are happening around us. We know from some of the psychedelic research at Imperial, for instance, we know with the research that was done with helping people with treatment-resistant depression, that one of the things that people with depression, which is just one of those words we use to glyph a whole bunch of social processes and problems which many of us experience. The thing about depression that emerged from some of that research at Imperial was that people who are depressed feel disconnected. That's one of the primary things that they feel. And either in the journey or subsequent to the journey, this particular cohort, the vast majority explained this disconnection is part of their depression, which was something they hadn't realized before they took the mushrooms. Yeah. So the mushroom spirit, if you like, the mushroom experience gave them that insight that they were disconnected from the world, and that's why they were sad. So when we do kind of ritual ceremony, whether we do it with entheogenic substances or not, but where we do ceremony which connects us deeply with the spirits of the place and the time, we seek to remake that connection. And we can think of that as a kind of well-being thing that's about us not being as depressed as we could be. I mean, you know, we all have suffering and difficulties in the world. But it's also a process which is really socially important. You know, when we are as well as we might be, then the interactions we have with people in the supermarket or our family or our co-workers are better than when we are struggling with our anxiety, our depression, our sense of disconnection. And so, you know, these are valuable technologies. They're techniques that we can share and we can learn them, remind each other of them when we forget.
Yeah. There's that element of the ecopsychology of it, of reconnecting to your natural world around you, and then just being able to embody that knowingness, that remembrance, which is definitely why I think so many of us have gone through the vast experiences of depression and different feelings of being disconnected from self, because we're so disconnected from the land itself in many ways. Yeah, it's very beautiful. With that, I was reading a book by a lady called Max Dashu, and she speaks about witchcraft and the wise women and the cunning women of Western Europe, Northern Europe, since like the 11th century. And I often reflect upon the sort of neo-shamanic renaissance that we're going through now at the moment, where a lot of people are traveling to Peru and to Mexico and learning so much from these cultures as a reminder of how we can reconnect. But I'm curious around your views of witchcraft as shamanism.
Oh, it's such an interesting question. I mean, to I suppose focus on the bit about people connecting and engaging with you know, the Americas, for example, particularly, and the shamanism that exists there, or the practices that exist in those spaces, particularly in relation to kind of psychedelic substances. I think that I know many people that do, I do, and it's important to kind of form those connections and that mutual global support around exploring these substances together in a really good way. It is also the case that it is relatively easy, even for well-meaning people, to have quite negative impacts on some of those kind of cultural settings. If we look at the story of Maria Sabina, peace be upon her, the great lady who was generous enough to share the mushroom medicine with the Wassons, and effectively is our lineage grandmother for any of us who continue to work with those medicines. Her life was made really difficult by her generosity and the way that the things she asked to happen, like not publishing her name, her address, and her you know, photographs of everything, that didn't happen. Yeah. And so I think we just need to be really thoughtful about when we go into somebody else's territory looking for their spirituality, their medicine, that that's not inherently a bad thing, but we just have to be really thoughtful, really considerate about that. So that's one thing in relation to this kind of looking for these other traditions who might inspire us and inform us, and it's definitely, you know, part of my kind of journey has been working with folks from those kind of cultural settings. I would say that part of the process for me, and part of the process I think for lots of people, is being able to kind of find, well, where does it lie in this land? Where can I find this within my space? You know, how can I discover this within the territory that I normally inhabit? And it's really important to do that, because we want to affect and to use the medicine to change things as they are here and now, not just to defer them to some kind of far-flung exotic location, either in space or in time. So one of the things with witchcraft, I mean, witchcraft is a word, the word witch is a really interesting word, it's, complex and historical etymology. By and large, it has historically meant bad magical practitioners, people who are doing bad things, either real or imagined. And it's been radically re-understood over the course of the last, 100 years, particularly over the course of the last maybe kind of 50 odd years, as this word that stands very radically differently for kind of, female empowerment, for the an earth-centered spirituality and so on. And that's good. That's an interesting transformation. But more broadly, I think that kind of lineage of magical practice that we call, it goes by various names in academia. It's often called the cunning tradition, the cunning folk. There is this lineage of magical practice. It's not that it didn't die out. Actually, it's gone through various transformations. Spiritualism towards the end of the 19th century is a good example of trance practice, often led by women, often happening in domestic spaces, often very simple technology without, darkened rooms and altered states of awareness. So all of these styles of magic, although they may not have the same kind of name, and we could subsequently describe them as species of shamanism, or work like the curandero people do, or forms of witchcraft in the kind of perhaps a modern sense, that lineage is there, fractured though it might be. And so it's kind of interesting to kind of tap into that. I would say that really since the end of the 19th century in Britain and Europe and the Euro-American bubble, been this big burgeoning of interest in like the esoteric and in the occult. Part of that is the colonial connection with places like India and so on, and bringing those that as we the British exported the dominant sort of language and governmental structures in the colonial project and caused huge amounts of distress within those communities. One of the things that was happening at the same time was, one might say it's an appropriation, but it was also a kind of a backwash flow of those ideas coming into European culture, being refracted through this lens. But it means that now you and I could probably have a conversation about the chakras quite easily. We could take this terminology, which has been re-understood in this way, and we could use that. So I think that one of the things about when we talk about any kind of tradition or any sort of process or set of practices is that these are all really highly syncretic. They're all these different flows coming in. Even people who sort of assume, it's arguably a bit racist to assume that the Shipibo have always done the thing that they do now in the style that they've always done it. Like, these are just people. They're going to be changing their stuff. They're going to be having different influences. They're going to be, some dude will be turning up and saying, hey, let's do it like this. And, then it sticks. And then people can't really remember what happened, and they say, oh, well, we've done this probably, I don't know, for ages. This is just how we are as human beings. And so I think that people who are interested in kind of psychedelics that definitely engage with those cultures that are maybe in the Americas or in India and other places that we have these great and venerable lineage traditions. Be thoughtful about the way you do that, and look for the magic in your own community, your own culture, your own mythology, your own landscape, the tiniest little bit of folklore. Let's imagine that we have this folklore that's shared, I know, in Britain and in Ireland, that you can travel to the Fairy Mound, and you can go and sleeping a night on the Fairy Mound is slightly dangerous, because any number of things might happen. So when we take our sacrament, our mushrooms, maybe we go to the Fairy Mound, because we're risking something, but then to dare is a thing. And we go to this place because it is our local sacred place of interacting with the spirits of the landscape, the other world.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I'm encountering more and more with the particularly because I work specifically with women, and the women that are approaching me are almost searching for a foundation upon which to grow their psychedelic exploration or their entheogenic exploration that allows them to tap back into this type of a landscape And you mention in the book Getting Higher about the vigil, the nature vigil, or you could use the word the vision quest, and it's something that I found very powerful in my own development and practice in terms of bringing in gnosis around what makes sense to me about how I interact with the medicine and how I interact with the spirits that I work with. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about the quest and the vigil.
So I have a good friend who's called Lavana Morgan, and she's just reissued a book called A Witch's Mirror, which is a fantastic kind of text, which is really amazing. It's got all kinds of things about like the act of making things as part of this kind of like magical process. The actual sort of constructing various objects, often from sort of found materials in the landscape and so on. And she talks a lot about sitting out, this process of going to a place and just being with it for a long time, right? Nothing beyond that, nothing else, no other special kind of process. Just go and spend a long time with a place. She talks about going to the ocean, going to the sea, and sitting with the sea for at least the incoming and the outgoing of the tide, and just being with it. And obviously, in our culture, we sort of think, well, that's not really anything, is it? Just sitting with a thing, really? Is that? But what, beyond that, surely there's something more. And then you sort of think, okay, so let's imagine that you take some mushrooms, right? What's happening? You're actually experiencing a profound introspective experience. Like nothing has changed in the apparent world. All that's really happened is that you've taken this substance into the body and you're experiencing an introspective experience. This is rather like the experience you have of being hungry, for example, or of feeling pain or indeed pleasure. This is an internal experience. And in order to get a lot out of it, and that's what we do when we do therapeutic type stuff, where we kind of fold the medicine inward and we say to the person, don't do the talking, don't do anything else, just go right down into the experience. We're feeling and we're noticing what's happening inside us. In order to train feeling and noticing what's inside us, one of the easiest ways is to go and spend time in a place and train feeling and noticing what's happening in that place. Yeah? Not necessarily anything dramatic. So a good example of this is that you decide, okay, I'm going to go to the ocean and I'm going to look at what's in the rock pool. If you sit by a rock pool and you just look at it, you won't see much happening at all, because you're a giant shadow that's appeared over in the world and in the landscape of these tiny creatures. You have to sit there for at least 20 minutes, half an hour, really, for all the creatures to start doing their thing again, realizing that you're no threat. So you have to learn to sit and to listen. And sitting and listening, whether you're doing it in your bedroom to your own movement of thoughts through kind of, very straightforward mindfulness of breath type meditation or whatever, whether you're doing it in the landscape by being attentive to a place and what's happening there and the other creatures that you're sharing the space with, or whether you're listening to what's happening inside you when the medicine is within, what you've fundamentally training is the ability to listen. We spend a lot of time as humans. I've got to do things. I've got to do stuff. I've got my emails to do. I'm doing an interview with this lovely person. We do things all the time, and having time just to sit and be with a thing and allow the impressions to come into us or out from us. That's a really valuable skill. And whether we call it vision questing or hedge sitting or sitting out or, whatever special word we stick with it, it's basically just go to a place, spend quality time with that place, Just in the same way you spend quality time with the feeling of the medicine, you spend quality time with whatever.
Yeah, I love that reflection on it. And I often say to when I'm working with women and my teachers, a lot of my own practicum involves traveling to spend time with oak for 5-6 days in the forest and just sitting. And I often tell people that witchcraft, from that instance, is the art of the subtle. So a lot of this is just really reconnecting to the subtle movements and just being able to sit with yourself. And I can really see like what the multiple benefits of that can be, even for people undergoing a therapeutic process with psychedelics, that the more you can cultivate that type of space outside of the psychedelic experience, then it helps to prepare you more and more for the movement inward and this and the subtle shifting inwards. So it's definitely something people should take more consideration of.
It's a bit like there are those lovely stories of people who say, "Oh, I went to South America, you know, and I did a dieta." You say, "Oh, that's fantastic. What did you do?" And you say, "What?" They said, "Well, I went out to this, you know, very remote place with no Wi-Fi, and I lived really simply for a while, and I only ate, you know, very simple food, or maybe I only ate the plant that I'm interacting with, you know." And it was profound and it was amazing. You say, okay, that's really cool. Next time you do it, you could go and get you know, a B&B an Airbnb in your neck of the woods, and you could just spend time with nettle or with oak, or there's no and if you do the same, the technique of like, okay, so number one, remove all your distractions. Number two, make life as simple as you can. Number three, pay lots of attention to either a particular plant or a particular aspect of the universe or whatever, and it will work. And you can do this wherever. And you know, this is no certainly I'm not kind of discounting people going and taking those journeys, because part of the journey is sometimes the going out your comfort zone, going to this weird place. But you could just as easily do this at, you know, in a relatively small and much less significantly carbon footprinted way in your own locality, if you know, as well. And if you've done that, that's brilliant. Next time, see how much you can kind of, you know, reimagine that as something that you can do within, you know, a 10-mile radius of your home. How would you do that? How could you do it in your home? Would there be a way that you could, you know, one day a week, half a day, you decide that you're going to disconnect from all the stuff, you're just going to, you know, the romantic poet Wordsworth, I think, talks about being diligently indolent. So just dreaming off, spending time, you know, look at lots of mammals other than us. You know, there's a cat, what's it doing? Oh, it's just lying about. It's not hunting, it's not grooming, it's just lying about. So having that kind of space, however we structure it, is really valuable, really valuable and important.
And you just reminded me of something else that I really loved in the book that again just resonated with a lot of my own sort of experiences, is around the act of shape-shifting and bringing that in a relatable way to people who are exploring with entheogens, and the guidance we can get from the animal kingdoms or whatever kingdoms it is that you are merging with.
I mean, let's imagine. Let's take as within the language this idea of a contemporary magical witchcraft, where part of our witchcraft tradition is this inhabiting and moving through animal forms. You know, we have the historical ideas of, you know, witches' familiars and transformation and all this kind of stuff. Certainly, what we have as part of our the practices that we can do. Firstly, you know, most modern people recognise the fact that we are just another animal. We're a very specialised and strange animal that does all kinds of weird things. Our only special skill really is the management and use of fire. Everything else is just an elaboration of things that other beings do. So to recognise our kinship with those other beings, right? To recognise the personhood of those other beings is really important. And then we have techniques. We have, if you look at something like the way that a lot of the kind of movement systems that emerge within Taoism, of things like Tai Chi Chuan and things like Qigong and so on, many of these forms, even the ones that are quite kind of martial and very technique orientated, they're defensive processes, they are based on animal movement. They're based on close observation of animal movement, re-understood through the kind of physiology that we have. So we are moving like animals. We are inhabiting the form of animals. We can do this practice even just when we go for a walk. So we can do this with other beings than you know, birds or mammals or whatever. So we might, for example, find ourselves walking around and we see a particular tree, it's a particularly beautiful tree, and I can see how its branches are sort of arched over. So I move my body to echo the branches of the tree, and I just find a physiological relationship with the tree. How does it feel to move as this tree is moving? This tree is moving much more slowly than I am, by and large. But how would that be? So there's a very practical technique. We pretend to be this other thing. We pretend to be this kind of this other being. And by pretending in that way, by kind of forming our bodies in that way, by closely observing those kinds of things, perhaps we might discover things in ourselves, you know? Perhaps because these are all our cousins, biologically speaking, genetically speaking, these are all sort of, some of them quite distant, but nevertheless they're all relations. And so maybe they've got stuff to teach us. And so maybe by even mimicking their movements, you know, there's really, really interesting stuff. And you can see it in the history of lots of kind of psychedelic writing of people who take medicines and then feel themselves transformed into an animal. So there's a magician called Austin Osman Spare who was knocking around in the sort of very early part, you know, earlyish part of the 20th century. And one of his techniques was a technique called atavistic resurgence, which is just a very fancy way of saying evoking this animal quality within us. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through movement. So if we look at kind of, you know, movement, dance, whether it's individual, whether it's kind of collective, this idea of moving like the thing, inhabiting that kind of quality. And in that sense, this is absolutely, certainly in the very modern sense, this is a species of witchcraft, because this is a kind of magic which is about, not necessarily about kind of controlling stuff over there, it's about inhabiting and becoming something, letting something come into us. So again, it's predicated on listening, it's predicated on observations, predicated on on allowing things into us, you know, and then for those things to emerge kind of through us. In that sense, in a very kind of literalist sense, one might think of this as a women's magic, you know. Certainly if we think of the stories of Odin, the ancient sorcerer from the kind of Norse, Germanic, Scandinavian peoples. This is a magician who has the power of the runes, which is the magic of speaking and writing. And this is also a magician who is sometimes even castigated for being a bit femme, who has the magic of trance, where things come into us and move through us, you know, the magic that typically was associated with women. Is this witchcraft? In the modern sense of the term, absolutely yes. We are transformed into cats. We are transformed into flying animals. We are transformed into fish that swim deep in the ocean. It's what we do.
It's what we do. I love that. And I love the connection between, yes, the vulva and the cedar and that magic and the connotations that were connected to Odin and Loki and to masculines in that genealogy. And with that, is that transcendental, you know, non-dual breaking down of the identity of separation, because now you can become the other, you can become the tiger, you can become the oak.
It's really, I mean, I'm very interested in a lot of kind of non-dual philosophies and ideas, and I think most people who've encountered the psychedelic experience eventually get to encounter something that looks like this absolute merging of self and other. You know, there's those peak timeless moments where, you know, it's white light or impossible darkness or whatever it happens to be, and fizz, the whole thing is, you know, one thing. And I think that the process of engaging, as I was saying, with say animals or trees or whatever, In a way, that's about understanding, noticing the other, but it's also about collapsing the divide. That's actually what it's about. It's about recognizing that, I nominally consider that I'm located in this physical form, which has been knocking around on this planet for like 53 years, and it has a certain history and so on. But I also know that the self who I am, the awareness who I am, is more like a kind of mycelial network that includes this physical body and also includes, just everything else, everything else ultimately. But in a smaller way, it's kind of connected with, the who I am is connected with my partner, my children, my place, all of this stuff. So unsurprisingly, I think the non-dual thing, it immediately transcends and includes nominal separation because it's non-dual. So it's the set, if you like, in set theory, it's the biggest kind of possible set. So the experience of interacting with, let's say, a spirit, whether it's in ayahuasca or it's in a physical form of an animal or whatever it happens to kind of be, this is a way of seeing the other. And then there's this kind of process where we recognize that the other is also the divine. We recognize the other is also self. We recognize, and we kind of get into and then consciousness is in that sort of non-dual kind of state. And in some respects, it's about, for me, it's that lovely dance between these things. There are moments of this kind of non-dual, undifferentiated awareness, and then there are these moments of like separation, and where the separation is important to allow the conversation to happen. Like, we can't have this conversation unless we're separate. It wouldn't make any sense, would it? It wouldn't make any sense, And one likes to think that from that conversation, from that interaction, there are all these other kind of ramifying possibilities. It's the world understanding itself, in some big philosophical kind of sense. So yeah, this kind of non-dual awareness and this deep relationality are by no means in any kind of opposition or tension. They're aspects of the same kind of thing.
Yeah, they're the mirror within the self, for sure, for sure. And with that, I mean, I'm sure people would love to hear a little bit about Chaos Magick, as you are a chaos magician. And I'm curious how central, I mean, obviously it's just one element, but do you actively work with entheogens in your, say, sigil creation and in that capacity?
Okay, so practically speaking, yes. So there's a lot of kind of, I think Chaos Magick is arguably one of the styles of magic that was most closely engaged with psychedelics, while many of the kind of forms of neo-paganism totally rightly and properly were seeking to have wider cultural understanding, and perhaps were playing down any aspect that might be problematic, in the late 20th century. But certainly, I think historically, people who are engaged with Chaos Magick, it's one of the strands within that tradition. It appears earlier if you look at the kind of the grimoire tradition and so on. These people were burning incenses with huge quantities of henbane and cannabis in them, which is part of the reason they were seeing such weird spirits. So Chaos Magick historically, it develops in Europe in the latter part of the 20th century. It's very kind of about praxis, so it's about technique. It's not so much about the what's the kind of metaphysics or what's the overarching kind of envelope. It's more this idea that within all these different traditions there are repertoires of technique, and the technique can be learned, can be experimented with and explored. So techniques such as the use of sigils is, probably the best known one, the one that's identified, again, talking about Austin Spare. He's often thought of as one of the kind of the fathers of contemporary sigil magic, and that feeds into the way that Chaos Magick is done by all kinds of different practitioners. The thing about Chaos Magick is that it's, for me, my interest in it is that it is very much about this, okay guys, what do we do? What are we doing? Often what are we doing with the body? How are we kind of entering altered states of consciousness? Are we doing this with breath? Are we doing this through sitting? Are we doing this through ecstatic dance? you know, what's going on, and what's the paradigm that we're inhabiting, the belief envelope, the style in which we're doing these things. So I think that another part of Chaos Magick that's really important for me is this approach that says, you know, there are obviously many great teachers and many great texts and many great lineages of tradition, but you might not have one to hand. So why not just give it a go? Why not just, you know, you and your affinity group thoughtfully and intelligently try and experiment with some of this stuff? So it kind of roots itself in the punk tradition of the latter part of the 20th century. It's like, pick up a guitar, try to make some music. Don't wait to be a consumer or a member of the audience. You too can be a producer. You can be, you know, be that musician. Try it out. Don't feel excluded. You know, try this stuff. So it's very much about practice. So in that sense, that's part of the reason that it works for me. It works for me as well because I'm part of, you know, a big international network of chaos magicians, and we kind of get together and we do group magical practice where we share different techniques. And that's basically what the meetings look like. It's like, number one person stands up and says, I've been learning a whole bunch of stuff about rune magic and I want to share it with you. They teach us the technique, we give it a go for whatever purpose or reason. That's fantastic. Maybe then, you know, we step outside, have a breather, refresh our glasses, and somebody else says, right, now we're going to do like a Hindu puja. This is going to take 3 hours long. This is going to involve this, this, and this. So it's a peer support network, and that's the magical pact of the Illuminates of Thanateros. That's what we do. We exchange techniques. Sometimes these are techniques that people have newly discovered. Sometimes these are ones that they've been practicing for many, many decades that they're sharing with others. So Chaos Magick tends to start from the position of we should experiment with things, and we should try things out for ourselves. And then, you know, the philosophy, the backstory, the kind of the particular cultural language that we might use to understand these things, that's kind of that's a secondary consideration. Yeah, it's about like doing the stuff. And for me, the way that Chaos Magick has sort of played out in my own practice is that it's helped me do what I guess I would naturally have done anyway, but it's helped me pare down my practice to really simple elements. So, you know, in common with everybody else, you know, I work with water and with fire and with directions and with space and all of that sort of stuff. But very often I don't use any special words from any particular cultures. You know, we're doing prayers to the fire or whatever, we call it the fire. And with the water, we just call the water. And it's just about often simplifying things. And I quite like that within the Chaos Magick system. That's partly because if you're going to explain a technique to a bunch of other people for them to do it in a peer support network, you can't give them the whole backstory. You just have to say, well, the essence of it is this, you know? The essence of it is like this movement or this sigil or this process or whatever. So it's a lot of it is about distillation, and that kind of gets back to getting higher, because for me it was an attempt at distilling a lot of the stuff down into really simple bite-sized sections. So there's a bit in the book where, and this was based on a conversation that I had with my oldest son, where he said to me, why is LSD such a problem? You know, why is it so heavily legislated against? You know, what's going on with it? And I said, well, there are many reasons, but one reason people get worried about it is because it's very responsive to where you are and what you're doing. And I said, it's like the difference between being with a group of friends in a beautiful environment, in a supported space, you know, with good medicine, and laughingly pointing at the trees and saying, hey, look at all the little faces in the trees. Or it's being in a worse situation, a bad setting, a difficult thing, where it's like, oh, look at all the little faces in the trees. The perception is the same, the environment is different. And so when we work with these things, what we need to do is we need to think about, like, you know, like Timothy Leary says, you know, the set and setting, the environment in which we're going to do that medicine. We're going to take that medicine. So getting higher is like trying to distill it down, just like I had to distill it down to my son, who was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 at the time. And I had to explain, like, what's the difference? And I said, well, it's about who you're with and, you know, what's going on. And so the perception can be very different. And he went, oh, yeah, right, I get that. It's like, yeah, that's, we try and make things, you know, I try as far as I can to make things simple.
I like that. I like the playfulness that can come with that type of practicum without needing the, and obviously you're also involved in the Wiccan community, so there must be a fair amount of ceremonialism tradition also relevant, but to have that space and to be in this time, you know, in 2022, where we can have this type of a conversation so openly and have a weave, or, you know, as big as this chaos magicians gathering and sharing these techniques and seeing what works, is just so inspiring. And it's really inspiring for people that they can feel more safe and playful to explore occultism.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, one of the things in getting higher is there's deliberately some kind of like jokey throwaway statements, and it also it doesn't go on about all the problems. Like we know, it's like you know, there's we know that these things can be difficult, dangerous, problematic. We understand that, and the book certainly points towards that and looks at kind of how we might mitigate some of the problems that we find. It's also the case that every year hundreds of thousands of people take psychedelics, often in not the best situation, in situations where they're criminalized for doing so, in situations where they have no idea of the potency or the exact composition of any of these materials. And by and large, most people end up having a nice time. Certainly with some of the medicines, you know, MDMA. I can't remember what the figures are at the moment for how much we allegedly consume in the British Isles, but I know it's enough that we have it now in our water systems. So it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And this is not to say that this, and of course, including that, there are problems with the use of these medicines in these kinds of ways. But most people, most of the time, manage to get through these experiences pretty well, you know. And so I think that if we start the conversation by saying, look, most of the time this is going to be great, this is going to be fine. Yes, of course there can be difficulties, but we're also set. What kind of setting are we creating if we always bring the problems to the fore? You know, we should deal with them in a thoughtful, intelligent, sensitive way. We shouldn't brush them under the carpet, but we should recognise that for many people, these medicines give them a sense of bliss, connection. They deepen their spiritual practice. They help them be more successfully with the suffering and difficulties that all of us face as human beings. Many people seek to acquire these medicines and to produce them in good, authentic, ethical and sound ways, and to work with them with good heart. And we should notice that. You know, we always notice the bit in our body where it's painful, and that's good because it brings our attention there. But we should be grateful and appreciative of all the bits that aren't wrong and all the bits that are functioning really nicely. And we should, give thanks for that.
And I think the last thing I want to touch on with where this direction has gone is just even around that. You also touch in the book on you kind of liken rave to ceremony, basically, and that's a conversation I'm constantly, you know, seeking to have around how we as a culture are seeking out these initiatory spaces, these communions or unions with that bliss state, that almost tantric type state that you can have on a dance floor with MDMA or whatnot. And I'd love just to hear a little bit of perspective on that.
I mean, is a rave a psychedelic ceremony? Yes, by every significant measure, you know, including even sacred poetry in praise of the medicine. You know, there's a guy in the place with a bittersweet face, and he goes by the name of Ebenezer Good. I mean, you know, there's epic poetry even. You know, when the people of the plains in Turtle Island in North America found themselves dealing with the European incursion and all the damage that came from that, and all of the alcoholism that found its way into those communities. They were very fortunate to have access to the peyote cactus, which made its way in the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century. It made its way up into, right up into the region that we now call Canada, with those native communities. And they were using that, they were creating a design that became known as the things like the Native American Church, peyote circle. They created that way of being with the medicine to help them with alcoholism, was one of the big things. And they drew syncretically on Christianity and on various different native traditions, and they invented new things. And they created a container, which was that we sit all night with the peyote and we pray and we have a drum rhythm. And the drum rhythm is this. Bum 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 bum. It goes all night with the gaps for the prayer, this one rhythm, the sound of a fetal heartbeat. Quite a fast dance floor rhythm, but something quite suitable for a rave. At least at about 3 a.m. in the morning, maybe, I don't know. But so that's a community who found that medicine, came into them, into their space, and they responded to it in a way to try and help heal themselves. And by dint of that, the wider world around them. So MDMA then comes into European or Euro-American kind of culture, and it comes in through all kinds of interesting routes, you know, the black disco scene, you know, that's part of that kind of story. The Goa and the influence of kind of Indian and European traveller culture in that sort of space is a really interesting thing. And what we come up with is a dance floor with a consistent rhythm, which is basically very similar. We come up with a space where you can chill out, you can be quiet, you can talk to other people, you can be massaged, this is a very intelligent way of using this medicine, and it's a way that evolved in really difficult conditions of oppression against that culture that was emerging. It appeared towards the sort of the tail end of perhaps what we might now call the First Cold War. It was a movement which was really powerful. It did lots of things. Soccer hooliganism and violence in Britain stopped almost overnight because all the people were going and taking pills and going raving together. And it's really, really great that human beings would feel the need, the desire to go to a place where they could feel a reduction in their fear because of the way that MDMA works on the amygdala, and they could be social and they could be together, right, in unity. What more beautiful example of a psychedelic ceremony than this? Exactly. Created under conditions of the war on drugs. So this is a ceremonial container created during wartime. And I like that. Long may it flourish, and may it go into its many iterations, and may it become even more conscious and even more beautiful and even more transformative for people.
For sure, yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's an absolutely beautiful space for us to close this conversation, and may that community just continue to grow, and the youth culture that's going to just continue to step into the dance scene and everything. It's really powerful medicine space for sure. Thank you, Julian.
You're really welcome. You're really welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak, Kathy. It's really appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you.